See, today I'll just give you an outline about some of the basic concepts in localization part, and just I'll be stressing more on the anatomical concepts. Before I start explaining the images, this is actually taken from Adams, old edition of Adams. I assume that the same diagram with a different color is there in the new edition of Adams. Now, can one of you tell me how is the vertebral body and the spinal cord segments related in the cervical region? So how is the relation in the cervical region? Can just quickly give me the reply, then with the diagram I'll explain the concept. So the question is, how is the vertebral body and the spinal cord segment related in the cervical region? Any answers? You can just give me a brief reply. Okay, one answer I've got is lower cervical segment. You add 1 to corresponding. Okay, so some addition you are given. See, try to remember this diagram. No, it's given in Adams. If you have a pictorial memory of the diagram, it is easy rather than just adding. I'll just explain how it goes. See, this is the first cervical vertebral body. So this is the first vertebral body. So you can see it directly overlays on first segment. So second overlies second. Third overlies third. But see, if you carefully see, third partly overlays 4 also. If you clearly see, third partly overlays 4 also to some extent. Now look at 4. Look at 4. It overlaps a small part of fourth segment, but a large part of fifth segment. Okay. A very small part of fourth segment. And if you look at 5, it is more or less clearly on 6. If you look at 6, it's more or less clearly on 7. If you look at 7, it is on 8 as well as T1. Okay, try to fix this picture in your mind. So adding 1, if you at the assessment level, you will confuse. So just remember that in the upper part is reasonably fair, but somewhere from 4 itself, it starts overlapping. You can see it overlaps 4 and 5. From the fifth one, it is clearly 6, clearly 7 for 6, and clearly 8 and D1 for 7. Okay. Did you understand this relation in the cervical segment? Did you understand the relation cervical? Fix this pictorial memory so that you can remember. So up to 3, it is clearly over 3. 4 is actually there is a slight overlap. Okay. So this diagram is given in Adams. If you keep looking at this picture repeatedly, you will get an idea how the thing actually overlaps. Okay, coming to the next one. Okay. Now you can try the reply for the thoracic. How is it related in the thoracic? When I explain, you will know why the thoracic is little more complicated. You just tell me how thoracic is related, then I will get back to the answer. How is thoracic related? So how is the relation in thoracic? Any answer for the thoracic? You just give a brief reply, it's sufficient. Okay, I'll give you an outline. See, thoracic segment localization is more complicated because it is actually decided by the curvature of this spine. Okay, this curvature is very much variable. How this spine actually curves. Am I audible? Am I audible? Okay. So this curvature is quite significantly important. If you carefully see here, it is very much different from what is given in the books. If you carefully look at, I'll just go back to the cervical, you will understand. See, cervical curvature is reasonably straight. Okay, if you look at this curvature, the vertebral bodies are very much straight. Okay, if I put a line, it is coming as a straight line. But you saw how is the curvature in the dorsal. So up to this part, up to 6, it is quite curved. Similarly here, dorsal part, up to 6, it is quite curved. Okay, so when such a curve happens, it is quite eccentric. So though it may appear that the D1 vertebra is over the second segment, D3 is over the, sorry, D1 is over the second segment, D2 is over the third segment, 3 over 4, 4 over 5, 5 over 6, 6 over 7, it may vary significantly. So this particular segment very much varies. Okay, so you have to look at the curvature. So this is very much varies in individuals. Lot of variation, it depends on the how much is the forward bend. So from 7 alone, it is reasonably straight. Okay, so it is something like how you saw in the cervical region. It's reasonably straight. So this is very localizing is very difficult. So remember, only one localization you need to remember is the D4, D5 vertebra. I think you know that is the place where gibbous often occurs. So try to understand the D4, D5 vertebral lesion, which can correspond to the 5th segment up to the 7th segment. Okay, 5 to the 7th segment can be affected by a D4, D5 lesion. Just remember that because the curvature can vary, that's why I am giving a broader area. And similarly, D10, due to the variation in the disc space which can occur in disease conditions, because you know that in disease condition the disc and intervertebral disc can be diseased. So below the D9 lesion, D9, D10, it can fluctuate anywhere between D10 vertebra up to L1 vertebra. So remember this. Okay. So depending on the intervertebral disc space, this can actually fluctuate. So what I'm trying to tell is that upper dorsal localization is very much variable in real practice. Lower dorsal region is relatively less variable. It is as good as cervical segment. But the problem is if there is a disc disease also, or if there is involvement of multiple vertebra, then the localization becomes little tricky. So this is also from Adam only. So try to fix this diagram here. Try to understand how is the curvature, how the vertebra can actually fluctuate between different spinal segments. Okay, did you understand the diagram and the variation I explained? And which are really important? The D9 to D11. Okay, and again the D4 and D5. Those two things you try to remember. Okay, going to the next. Now this is relatively straightforward. You have the L1. L1 is the only thing which overlies. So this directly overlies the sacral segment. Okay. So a very fine demarcation of the lower dorsal and the lumbar is not actually possible. Okay. So L1 is predominantly will be the lower lumbar and predominantly the sacrum. L2 can also vary depending on how the thing is there. And remember, these are all roots. These are all the roots which come down. So once the roots come down, all the remaining L2 to L5, that will predominantly affect the roots. Okay, that will predominantly affect the roots. So is this clear till now? Is it clear where the localization is easy to make, where the localization is difficult? So there are certain clear areas where the localization is possible. I told you one is the cervical is reasonably localizable, D4, D5 and D9, D10 and D12 and L1. So these are the common locations we try to localize with confidence. Others we can probably give a differential diagnosis. You can give a range. So this to this we can tell. So how you actually read in the books are not very precisely present. Okay, did you get an idea about the relation between the vertebra and the spinal segments and to some extent the lower spinal roots? Any doubts, you please clarify here. If you have read something and it is different from what we see here, please ask, I will clarify it. Okay, so before you ask your doubts, let me just ask you what is cauda equina, what is conus? What is conus medullaris and what is cauda equina? A very common discussion in spinal cord diseases. What is cauda equina and what is conus? Yes, can you try some answers? What is cauda equina and what is conus? In the clinical examination body, we are able to feel the spine. Yeah, that is another problem. I agree. So when there is a tenderness over the spinous process, it may be a little difficult to really appreciate the vertebral lesion also. That is another challenge you will have, especially when there is deformity of the spine. So one reply I have got is cauda equina, nerve root compression, bladder involved. So I'm asking what is the anatomical explanation? What is a cauda equina? Lumbar enlargement along with sacral segment bilateral. What is it? Do you mean by cauda or conus? Can you describe it? No, I am asking anatomical. I think you are telling functional. I am asking just an anatomical difference between a conus and a cauda. I am not asking UM and LM, that comparison I am not asking. Okay. So anyway, I'll go ahead with the reply. Are you able to see the diagram which is showing you the conus and the cauda? Are you able to see it in the screen, the diagram showing conus and cauda? Okay. See, conus medullaris is nothing but the see, you are able to see here, this is the lower part, this is the conus. What you see here is the conus medullaris. The terminal coney part of the spinal cord is the conus medullaris. Basically, it has the, as you have already seen in the previous diagram. So this is what is the conus. Okay. So basically, it has predominant of the sacral fibers. So it has the sacral fibers which does not play a big role in motor function. Okay, but it plays an important role in bladder function. Just remember like that. So the lower part of the spinal cord is the conus medullaris, which predominantly has the sacral segments and plays a role in sacral segment function, mainly the bladder, and doesn't play a significant role in motor function. Whereas cauda equina, you can see here, so this entire thing is the cauda equina. Okay, all the roots which emanate out. So you will be having, for example, I'll just go back to the, so you are able to see the L1, isn't it? I'm just telling the L1 radical. See, L1 radical comes out here. I'm drawing L1. This is L1. Okay. Now this is L2. So it comes out L2. So this is L3. This is L4. To some extent L5. Okay. But if you look below this, you look at L5, L4, it is part of the bunch. Okay, I marked it. It is part of the bunch. So what we see is the entire bunch. So the bunch starts from the L4, L5, and then automatically all the sacral fibers will come. Okay, so that is why this total bunch is called the cauda equina, and this bunch is present bilaterally, both in the left and the right, and as it comes down, they will fall down together in the inferior part of the vertebral canal actually. So that is what is the conus medullaris and cauda equina. So did you understand the Imaging, did you understand the imaging explanation for conus medullaris cauda icona? So cauda icona is nothing but a bunch of radicals below L4. And I explained why L1, L2 radical doesn't come, because it leaves the vertebral canal at a higher level itself. Okay. You are able to understand the difference between cauda and conus? See, any doubts, please ask. This is something which is often confused by the postgraduates. So, did you understand what is actually the conus? Conus is the lower sacral part, doesn't have the motor segment. Because some of the tables, what I am going to explain, you need to understand this. Cauda icona, it is unilateral involvement of nerve root. Yes, often it is unilateral because it comes at both directions, isn't it? But it depends on the lesion. But if the lesion is central, so let's just explain. Here the entire bunch is there. If the L4 disc and the vertebra completely compress like this, it can affect bilateral. Initially unilateral, again it can be bilateral. So often it is unilateral, I agree. But sometimes depending on what presses these roots, if a large structure presses this root, then it can be bilateral also. But generally it starts on one side, then it can go to the opposite side. That is why we tell in caudal lesion, and the compression of the root starts at one side, it can expand to the opposite side also. To begin with, it is asymmetrical, and mostly it is restricted to be asymmetrical, almost always. Very occasionally it is affected on both sides. Okay. Okay. Now going on to this particular diagram. See, why is this diagram important? This diagram, I put it because for you to understand the position of the sacral fibers. Sacral fibers is medial in the posterior column. Sacral fibers is outermost in the pyramidal tract. Similarly, in the spinothalamic tract, sacral fibers are anterior lateral. Okay. So remember these 3 points. The location of the sacral fibers are very important, because a lesion which is starting, let's assume that a lesion which is compressing like this, behind, or a lesion which is compressing the front, sacral fibers can get affected. But when a lesion is central and when it keeps on it expanding, it is expanding. Okay, so it is affecting there is some amount of sparing of the sacrum. Okay, so it depends on from where is the lesion which is originating. So if it is originating from the center and expanding, then this is going to be spared. On the other hand, when it is going to come from the anterior part, then sacrum is going to be affected here. Posterior most part, medial, sacrum will get affected. So try to understand, don't apply the phenomenon of sacral sparing universally. It depends on the lesion. Okay, so reason I showed you this diagram is for you to understand how the sacrum fibers can be affected in diseases. Did you understand the image and the picture? Did you understand the image and the explanation I gave? The importance of arrangement of the fibers with reference to the lesion. So don't go always by the sacral sparing. It is not a rule. So you have to go by from where the lesion is coming. Okay, you know that the dorsal column is posterior. So if a vertebra comes from anterior, if the vertebra straight away presses the sacrum, sacrum can be hit early, and posterior column may be affected later. Pain and temperature may be affected earlier. Whereas when the lesion starts from interior, then the picture may actually vary. Okay, now coming to some of the differences what is given in Alagappan. Now, many of the differences as exceptions. So I'll start from here. I think now you know why cauda equina is asymmetrical, because basically it is a bunch of roots. So quite often the root is pressed on one side, then it is pressed on the opposite side. So often it is asymmetrical, starting at one place and going to the opposite side. Conus is a central lesion, I told you. So it is symmetrical. As I told you, it is the lower part of the sacral segment, and coccygeal is also affected. So that is why it is symmetrical. Okay. Now, conus lesion often, if it originates in the center, dissociated sensory loss is present. Again, it's not a rule. For example, if the L1 vertebra, I'll go back to the lesion here. See, let's assume that the L1 vertebra is compressing the lower part of the spinal cord, the conus, straight like this. It's compressing straight like this. Okay. In that case, you may not have a dissociated sensory loss. Okay, because anterior part of the spinal cord get affected. So see, let's assume this is the lower part. You have the L1 vertebra here. L1 vertebra which is sitting here. Let's assume this is the L1 vertebra. And if the L1 vertebra goes posterior, straight like this, L1 vertebra goes like this, presses the spinal cord like this. So it can affect the anterior horn. It can affect the anterior horn, and it can affect the sacral fibers first. And the pain fibers, dissociated sensory loss occurs when it affects the center. That may not occur at all. Okay. So this is not a rule. Dissociated sensory loss is not a rule in conus medullaris lesion. It is applicable when the lesion is originating from internally. For example, when there is a intramedullary lesion, tail of the spinal cord, you have a tumor sitting inside in the center. Then you may get dissociated sensory loss, but it is not always present. And obvious is cauda equina is more like a radiculopathy, so you won't get a dissociated sensory loss there. And root pain is common, you know that, because it is a radical which is pressed. Root pain does not occur here because radical is not affected in conus lesion at all. So try to understand that point of difference. Now, point you need to remember here, these are bladder fibers. Okay, so this will affect the bladder and bowel very early. Okay, whereas it is late and depends on the root involved. Okay, so only when depending on the root only it is getting affected. Don't bother about these two. Fasciculation, decubitus, don't confuse yourself. It is more tricky to explain this because, as I told you, fasciculation again cannot be generalized. Fasciculation is possible. It can occur in any of the lesions. Fasciculation is not a common with root lesion. So fasciculation and decubitus better not to commit. So when you tell, you just tell the bladder involvement, one. Then you tell about the symmetry, asymmetry, tell about the dissociated sensory loss, tell about the root pain. Don't tell anything more than that. And remember the motor one. Don't forget the motor. Conus, motor is, as in sacrum is there, motor is not involved. Quite often the bladder will be affected, motor will be affected only when the upper segments are, upper roots, like lumbar roots are affected only, you will get the conus medullaris. So it is not something that commonly involved in conus medullaris. Okay, so did you get this difference? So easy way to remember is that conus lesion, basically there will be early bladder involvement. There will be lack of motor involvement. Whereas in cauda equina, it will mimic like a radiculopathy. It will affect usually one of the limb, and the limb will be completely weak. So it will be a useless areflexic limb. Bladder is not affected. So it will present more like a one limb weakness which is going on to other limb weakness if the lesion is quite big and it starts compressing the opposite radical also. Okay, so this is something you have to understand between conus and cauda. Try to fix the concept clearly and try to explain. Okay, now coming to the extramedullary, intramedullary. Again, this you need to really understand here. So before coming to extramedullary, intramedullary, I'll just take this. I will go back to this. See, extramedullary means anything outside the spinal cord. Okay, intramedullary, what are the things? You can have a spinal cord tumor. Let's assume that the spinal cord tumor is located here. Spinal cord tumor is located here. And it starts expanding like this. Okay, it is expanding. So what happens when it is at this plot? No weakness will occur. When it is here, depending on the pyramidal tract, because pyramidal tract will be somewhere here. Okay, so this tumor will compress the pyramidal tract and it can cause weakness. So once the tumor comes to the central part here, it will cut the crossing fibers of the pain and temperature. So it can cause dissociated sensory loss. So when it goes here, anterior horn gets affected. It can cause fasciculations. Contrarily, when the lesion is starting from somewhere here, let's assume that it is starting here and it is expanding like this. Okay, now here it has affected the anterior horn cell, it has affected the spinothalamic tract also, but it has not affected the pyramidal tract, it has not affected the pain fibers, it has not affected the posterior column. So intramedullary lesion, try to remember, depending on the lesion, there are many intramedullary lesions. It can be a transverse myelitis where everything can be affected. It can be a tuberculoma which can originate from any part of the spinal cord. It can be an intramedullary tumor. It can be a secondary. It can be a syringomyelia. So depending on where it is, it will create the sequence of symptoms. So this is why history is important in intramedullary lesion. So what is the initial onset? What is the next? What is the next? You can actually guess the location of the lesion and appropriate diagnosis also you can give. So please remember that. Okay. So don't generalize intramedullary, extramedullary as a rule. So intramedullary depends on the lesion. Extramedullary, you just remember mainly the vertebral pathology, or you can combine the disc with the vertebral pathology. Okay. So let me start with this. Intramedullary lesion, you don't get a root pain. You don't get a root pain. But you get what is the funicular pain. That's again not very common. It is a segmental burning sensation. For example, if L1 is affected, in the location of L1, you will get a segmental burning sensation that is called funicular pain. Okay, so root pain is rare in intramedullary. You may get a funicular pain, and root pain is common in extramedullary lesion. This is assuming that you are looking at a vertebral or a disc pathology. So remember that. Second is dissociated loss. Dissociated loss is present only when the lesion is central. Only when the lesion starts central. This is again not a rule. When the lesion starts from central, already I told you with the diagram. So only a central intramedullary lesion will start with the dissociated sensory loss. Okay. So a central lesion which affects the pain and temperature and which does not affect the posterior column, then only it will cause dissociated sensory loss. Okay. Again, sacral sparing for pain and temperature. Again, it is a central lesion. Central lesion which is expanding. So dissociated sensory loss and sacral sensation is applicable for Central lesion which expands. I'll just go back to the diagram again so that you will understand it. So three things are given there. Dissociated sensory loss will occur only when the lesion affects the center. Second thing what we told was, I'll just club joint position sense also here. Okay. So dissociated sensory loss will be there only when this part is affected. Central part is affected. Sacral fibers will be spared only when the lesion is again central. Joint position sense will be affected only when the lesion extends to this part. Okay. Now let me just look at a central lesion. I'll explain the central lesion. So you have a lesion which is expanding from the center part of the spinal cord. So it will affect the crossing over fiber, because you know that fibers after entering here, it will come and cross over. Similarly here it will come and it will cross over. So when it affects here, pain and temperature is lost. Okay, but touch is preserved. Touch is preserved. This is called dissociated sensory loss. Okay. So when the lesion is center, it causes dissociated sensory loss. And the lesion very rarely expands beyond this point. Okay. Doesn't expand beyond this point. So what happens? Joint position sense is preserved and sacral sensation is preserved. So that is what is given here. Intramedullary dissociated sensory loss is present. Sacral sparing for pain and temperature is affected. Joint position sense is spared. So these three findings are applicable only when the lesion is central. But as I told you, when the lesion is eccentric, it is not actually applicable. Okay. Now going on to the upper motor neuron lesion. So in extramedullary it is common. Intramedullary it is less common. Again, it is not a rule. Again, this is based on, I'll go back to the same diagram. Again, I'll go back to the same diagram. So intramedullary, extramedullary. So first thing what they are telling is that what we saw just now was upper motor neuron lesion is common. So why is it's less common? Again, draw the same thing. A central lesion has to move at this direction. It should move this much to cause a Ullmann lesion, whereas it has to move only this much to cause the anterior horn cell lesion. So from the center part of the spinal cord, anterior horn cell is closer, whereas pyramidal tract is little at a longer distance. This is at a longer distance. So only with the distance factor we are actually talking about it. So upper motor neuron lesion is in extramedullary, in intramedullary it is less common because of the distance. Okay. So here if you look at lower motor neuron lesion, muscle atrophy, they tell it is wide. It is wide. So as I told you, intramedullary lesion, assuming it is central, it reaches the anterior horn cell quickly. It does not reach the pyramidal tract that quickly. And since anterior horn cell is affected, you will also get fasciculation. This can also be explained. Whereas extramedullary again is variable. Same thing I told you. It has quick access to the pyramidal tract, and we cannot tell the LMN is not common because UMN actually dominates. I'll just give you an example of that. Again, going to the same diagram. Let's assume you have the vertebra here. You have the vertebra here. Okay, when it straight away compresses, when there is a compression, let's assume that it becomes like this. So it presses the pyramidal tract straight away, and it causes pyramidal tract weakness. Localized anterior cell involvement is relatively rare, depending on how it expands. For example, if it expands from behind, then pyramidal tract can be affected more common. So it depends on how the entire thing actually occurs, from which direction the lesion actually goes to tell whether these things are common. So when you tell the difference, all these differences, all the differences which has been elaborated here, it is based on the assumption that the lesion is central and it expands. Okay. Is that difference clear? Did you understand the intramedullary extramedullary difference and relation to the lesion? So extramedullary is very difficult. Extramedullary depends on lesion, from which direction it comes, what is the lesion, it plays the role. Intramedullary, all these diagrams, you fix in mind the central lesion which is expanding. The central lesion which is expanding, therefore it affects the crossing over touch fibers. Then it can affect the anterior horn cell because access is quite good. So even after assessing anterior horn cell, it may not be able to affect the sacrum because it is more distant. And similarly, it may not affect the pyramidal tract because it is little distant. So that is basically the idea, and it is then depends on the lesion again. Extramedullary, it's highly variable. You cannot put this one size to all conditions which cause extramedullary lesion. It depends on the lesion. Okay. Now going to the next diagram, next table. The intradural, extradural, for all practical purposes, very, very difficult to really differentiate. Okay. So extradural, quite often it also produces kind of a vertebral or a radicular involvement. So this kind of a local tenderness is common. Okay. And symptoms are reasonably of a shorter duration because it produces kind of a dramatic symptom. Because it produces vertebral pain, it is of short duration. So you try to understand that correlation. Here, vertebral pain is not common. Therefore, symptoms take a long duration. And benign malignant, I don't think it's correct. It can be either way. But generally, intradural are benign. But this is again not a rule. Don't stress on that much. And as I told you, vertebral pain, it is whether it is symmetrical or extra asymmetrical. Again, this is very difficult. So I think you can look at 2 points here: local tenderness and nature of symptom. Maybe you can give the nature, you can add it, but again it's difficult. So intradural, extradural, technically it's very, very difficult to really tell. So generally assessors will accept this asymmetrical symmetry. Personally, I'm not very much in favor of that, but try to understand this combination of pain and shorter duration of symptom, absence of pain and a longer duration of symptom. That could be a better differentiation, in addition to, of course, symmetrical or asymmetrical. Okay, coming to conus, I think this you can remember. This conus, I think this is there in the newer thing only. I told you, conus is symmetrical. Dissociated sensory loss if it is central. Walking, so motor fibers are not affected. Leaking patient, so bladder is affected. Same thing which I told you. Motor fibers are not affected. Bladder fibers are affected. It is symmetrical. Dissociated sensory loss depending again the location of the lesion. Quite often if it could be a central lesion, but that's not always a true. If it comes from posterior, even the I told you, L1 can also press the conus lesion. If L1 presses the conus lesion, you need not have a dissociated sensory loss. It will be like a compressive myelopathy, but motor fibers will be relatively spared there. So cauda is areflexia will be there. It will be asymmetric. Bladder is occasionally affected depending on the segment which is affected. Okay. Now epiconus is a little lower part of it. I think it's not that actually relevant. Epiconus. Basically, what they mean by epiconus is sparing of the bladder fibers. You remember that epiconus is nothing but a lesion which spares the bladder fibers. So maybe this technically, the neurologically, this division is not actually correct. But just remember, it spares the bladder. Bladder fibers is spared. So that is what we call as epiconus, and motor fibers are affected. Okay. So bladder is spared, but motor is affected. So it's actually opposite of what you see in conus. Conus, the bladder is affected, motor is not affected. Here bladder is not affected, whereas motor is affected. I think you just remember that point alone. As far as epiconus is concerned, it's a very small segment. As I told you, L4, L5, S1, S2, that kind of a lesion is actually not common. I'll show you the diagram, the vertebral cord which I showed earlier. See, what you are looking at is this lesion. See, what you are basically looking is L4, L5, S1, S2. This is what they are telling. Okay. This is what they are telling. So if you look at the segment part, this is a very eccentric part. So that lesion wise, it is not that common. Okay. So don't bother much about the epiconus. Just remember, epiconus is opposite of conus medullaris with reference to bladder and motor symptom. Okay. And before I conclude, I just want you to, okay, this I'll just tell, some people ask this, paraplegia and flexion, and before that, did you understand the conus epiconus? Junaid is telling epiconus similar to cauda. No, epiconus is not similar to cauda. The epiconus is actually the part of the spinal cord only. See, cauda is basically the roots. What I was trying to tell is the, no, 1 second, I think you got confused with the diagram paint I showed you. See, what I was telling is that the lesion which will be affected on the conus will be here only. This will be the lesion. Okay, but that will affect these roots. What I was trying to tell is that a lesion which is affecting only this and not the tail part is not common. Let me just draw and show you. I think I did a mistake in showing the roots. Probably you got confused. See, this is the conus medullaris. So here you are having the different segments. Let's assume that this is L4, L5, S1, S2. Here S3 comes. See, for a lesion to affect only this particular segment is rare. That is what I was trying to tell. So lesion commonly affects this part, or it affects the entire part. Okay. So basically it is the tip of the cord lesion only. Epiconus is the tip of the cord lesion. Did you understand the difference now? Okay. Now going to this paraplegia and extension and flexion, it's not a very valid question, but just try to understand. Paraplegia and flexion means complete cord transaction. Just remember that point primarily. It is a complete cord transaction. That's the first point you need to remember. I'll just give a natural history. Let's assume transverse myelitis. Initially, the patient will be having a paralytic limb, completely paralytic limb. That is at the state of spinal shock. But subsequently, when the lesions recover, the patient will start to flex. The hip will flex. So when the hip flexes and the knee also flex, that is called paraplegia flexion. It is not a good sign at all. It indicates that both the pyramidal and the extrapyramidal is affected. So they will have severe thing like flexor spasm. Other thing, you would have seen some people who have complete cord transaction with no recovery at all. Even if you touch the leg at somewhere at lower part, they will get a flexor spasm. Whereas paraplegia and extension is predominantly the pyramidal tract. So this flexor withdrawal reflex is not there. So basically, paraplegia and flexion extension is decided by these two things: flexor withdrawal reflex and mass reflex. Okay. So just remember these 2 points alone. So complete cord transaction affecting both the pyramidal and extrapyramidal tract causes flexor withdrawal reflex and a mass reflex, whereas that is absent in the partial type of transaction. It's not a very relevant difference, but just remember it. Sometimes they actually ask. Is it clear? Paraplegia and flexion and extension. Okay, before I finish the class, just go through these topics. These are the common things what you ultimately discuss. So transverse myelitis, acute inflammatory demyelinating polyneuropathy, especially when it presents as paraplegia, vertebral compression and intervertebral discompression, subacute combined degeneration of the cord, and syringomelia. These are the actual cases we may get. So 5 things which are common. All the other things are more theoretical, like spinal cord infarction, we don't see that common. Intramedullary tumors, we don't see that common. And even tumors originating in the extradural or intradural tumors are relatively common. So these are the things which you need to really go through in the theory part of it, looking into the presenting symptoms, looking into all the features, try to understand. Okay, so I think today I have just given you an outline about the anatomical concepts between the vertebra and the segments and how you need to really have that in mind when you localize it. And I showed you the spinal cord diagram and showing you what is the importance of the sacral sparing and why the sacral sparing occurs and what kind of lesions produce sacral sparing, and the fact that it is not a rule for all kind of lesions. And I think I gave you some amount of clarity on what is a conus medullaris lesion, what is a cauda lesion, and what is epiconus. So how the lesion actually originates and what is the rationale behind the differences. Okay, so this is something you need to really look at and revise Adams and other basics books, and that should be fine for you.